The Galactic Federation had been watching Earth for years, but they had never considered it a threat. To them, humans were primitive, an undeveloped species with no grasp of true interstellar power. The Federation's most elite soldiers were sent to this backwater planet on a simple mission: scout it, assess its value, and prepare it for future exploitation. They arrived cloaked in the night, their ships invisible to Earth's rudimentary detection systems. Landing in the heart of a dense wilderness, the soldiers looked around with a mix of disgust and amusement. Earth was covered in thick forests and sprawling fields, untouched by any serious technological progress. The air, too, was unrefined, filled with organic smells unfamiliar to the sterile environments of their own worlds. The team leader, Commander Zarthok, sneered behind his helmet. "Primitive creatures," he muttered, gesturing at the surroundings as his soldiers deployed their advanced equipment. They set up a base within hours, their technology so advanced it defied human understanding. They felt untouchable, their confidence bolstered by the shields and weaponry they carried: plasma rifles, advanced scanners, and tactical armor that was practically indestructible by Earth standards. "Humans won't even know we're here until it's too late," one soldier remarked, his voice thick with arrogance. The others laughed, already envisioning how quickly they could subdue the planet's population once the Federation gave the signal. In their minds, the mission was already a success before it had truly begun. But despite their laughter, they hadn't gone unnoticed. Unbeknownst to them, hidden in the shadows, eyes were already watching. Earth was not as defenseless as it appeared, and the wilderness they mocked had secrets that even their advanced technology couldn't detect. Their first encounter with the locals was laughably easy. A lone hiker stumbled upon their camp and froze, staring wide-eyed at the armored figures in disbelief. He didn't even have time to scream before he was captured, paralyzed by a simple stun blast. The soldiers laughed at his helplessness, amused by how easily humans could be subdued. They sent him back to the ship for interrogation, confident that the others they might encounter would pose no greater threat. "Pathetic," one of the soldiers said, shaking his head. "If this is the best Earth has to offer, we'll be done here in days." Zarthok, amused by the simplicity of it all, ordered his soldiers to fan out, explore more of the area, and gather information about the planet's geography. They needed to find strategic locations for the larger forces that would eventually come to harvest Earth's resources. The soldiers complied, moving out in small teams to scour the forests and valleys nearby. They activated their cloaking devices, confident that their technology made them invincible. But their confidence blinded them. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, something felt off. The dense forest seemed too quiet, the air too still. The soldiers shrugged it off, assuming that Earth's primitive life forms were just instinctively avoiding their presence. Yet, the further they traveled, the more uneasy they became. Equipment began to malfunction in ways their technicians couldn't explain. Scanners gave false readings. Communication devices crackled with interference. A soldier reported seeing movement in the trees, but when they turned to investigate, nothing was there. The commander dismissed the concerns. "It's just the local wildlife. Focus on the mission." But then, one team failed to report back. Zarthok sent out a search party, confident that a few Earth creatures couldn't have posed any real threat. Yet, the search party itself did not return. Now, even Zarthok couldn't ignore that something was wrong. He dispatched more soldiers, fully armed, but they too went missing. Frustration turned to confusion, and confusion into anger. What was happening? These humans weren't supposed to be capable of this. Still, Zarthok refused to believe they were in any real danger. The Federation's technology was light years ahead of anything on Earth. He ordered his remaining soldiers to tighten security around the camp, ensuring their shields were operational at all times. "We are not losing this mission to an inferior species," he snarled. As night fell, an eerie silence enveloped the camp. The soldiers remained on high alert, scanning the surroundings with increasingly malfunctioning equipment. It wasn't long before the first scream pierced the quiet. A soldier had gone to relieve himself behind a tree. He never came back. When they searched for him, they found nothing but a trail of blood and claw marks on the ground. panic began to spread. These weren't accidents or environmental hazards anymore. Something, or someone, was hunting them. Zarthok tried to maintain control, but his soldiers' fear was palpable. They had no idea what they were up against. For the first time, the once arrogant commander considered the possibility that they had severely underestimated this planet. The initial disappearances had been unsettling, but now the alien soldiers were losing control. They had come expecting a simple scouting mission, and suddenly their advanced technology seemed useless against the unseen force that was picking them off. The dense wilderness that had seemed harmless at first now felt like an enemy in itself, its thick trees and undergrowth concealing whatever was out there hunting them. Commander Zarthok's frustration was turning into something darker: fear. Not for himself, of course. He was a veteran of dozens of worlds and had never faced an enemy that his soldiers couldn't crush. But here, in the wilderness of Earth, something was different. His soldiers were starting to break, their usual discipline giving way to panic. The advanced sensors and scanners, once their greatest advantage, were failing to pinpoint any threats. The forest seemed alive, mocking them with every malfunction. They decided to send out more patrols, heavily armed and ready for whatever was lurking in the trees. The soldiers advanced cautiously through the thick vegetation, their plasma rifles at the ready, scanning for any sign of movement. But nothing came. The forest was still, too still. The birds, the insects, even the wind seemed to be holding their breath. Every snap of a twig or rustle of a leaf sent them spinning around, weapons raised, but there was never anything there. Hours passed without incident, and just as they began to think it was safe, another team failed to report back. This time, there was no room for doubt. Something, or someone, was hunting them, and it was doing so with deadly precision. They found the missing team the next day, or what was left of them. Their bodies were scattered across a small clearing, torn apart in a way that didn't make sense. Some had clearly died from plasma burns, likely from their own weapons, fired in a panic, but others had been killed with crude, primitive tools. Broken branches, rocks, and animal traps. It was almost insulting, the way the attackers had brought down soldiers with the same primitive tactics humans might use to hunt animals. And yet it had worked. The team had been wiped out without any of their advanced tech saving them. The soldiers remaining at the camp began to talk. They whispered about the stories they had heard, legends of Earth's hunters. The humans who lived in these remote areas were not like the weak city dwellers they had mocked earlier. These were people who had been hunting in these forests for generations, who knew every inch of the land, every trick of survival. These hunters didn't need technology. They didn't rely on sensors or drones. They were the apex predators of their environment, and they had begun hunting the hunters. Panic spread quickly now. Soldiers who had never known fear were suddenly haunted by every shadow, every sound in the forest. The camp became a fortress, with every soldier on high alert, constantly scanning the perimeter, but it didn't matter. The attacks didn't come directly. The humans weren't foolish enough to engage in open combat. They moved through the forest like ghosts, striking from the shadows, setting traps that disabled the soldiers' tech and neutralized their weapons. One by one, the soldiers fell, their numbers dwindling rapidly. And every time they tried to fight back, the humans disappeared into the forest, impossible to track. They never saw the hunters coming, only the aftermath. Broken bodies, equipment destroyed or repurposed, plasma rifles torn apart and left behind as a message. Technology wasn't going to save them here. Zarthok's patience was gone. His attempts to track the attackers had failed, and now his soldiers were refusing to leave the camp. They were scared, something he had never seen in them before. These were supposed to be the elite of the Galactic Federation, the best trained and best equipped soldiers in the galaxy. But they had no answer for the hunters. Every tactic they tried, every defensive perimeter they set up, the humans countered effortlessly. The commander tried to rally his troops, reminding them of their superiority. "We are the Federation's finest. These are just primitives, savages. Use your heads, follow your training, and we will crush them." But the soldiers no longer believed him. The truth was, they had underestimated Earth and its people. They had come expecting to deal with a weak, backward species. Instead, they had walked into the territory of apex predators who knew how to kill without relying on anything but their skill and knowledge of the land. Zarthok couldn't deny the truth any longer. These humans were unlike any enemy they had faced before. Their ability to adapt, their patience, and their relentless strategy were eroding the Federation soldiers' will to fight. This was no longer about superiority in weapons or numbers. It was a fight for survival, and the humans had already claimed the upper hand. As night fell again, the camp grew deathly quiet. The soldiers huddled together, weapons drawn, eyes darting into the darkness. They knew the humans were out there, waiting. Every snap of a branch, every rustle in the trees, sent waves of tension through the camp. Zarthok himself was not immune to the fear that gripped his troops. He could feel the weight of his failures pressing down on him. They had come to conquer, but now they were the ones being hunted, their lives in the hands of these so-called primitives. The truth was bitter. They had walked into a trap of their own arrogance, and Earth's hunters were going to make them pay for it. Jack had spent years in these woods. Long before he became a park ranger, he had learned every trick the wilderness had to offer. He knew how to track without leaving a trace, how to blend into the shadows, and most importantly, how to hunt. His time in special forces had refined these skills, making him a master of survival and combat in any terrain. But now, these same skills were being put to the test in a way he never imagined, against enemies from another world. When the aliens first arrived, Jack had kept his distance, watching them from a distance. Their technology was beyond anything he'd ever seen, but he could tell something about them right away. They were arrogant. They moved through the forest like they owned it, their armor and weapons giving them a false sense of invincibility. They didn't respect the land, didn't understand the danger they were walking into. Jack knew that attitude would be their downfall. The moment they started attacking the locals, people who had no way to defend themselves, something snapped in Jack. These aliens thought they could invade his home, kill his people, and face no consequences. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He wasn't going to sit by and let it happen. Jack knew he couldn't take them head on. Their armor and weapons were far too advanced for that. But he also knew something the aliens didn't. In these woods, technology wasn't everything. The land itself could be a weapon, if he knew how to use it. And Jack knew exactly how. He started with simple traps, snares, pitfalls, and tripwires, meant to disorient and confuse the soldiers. These weren't the kind of traps meant to kill, they were designed to send a message. Every time an alien patrol was caught in one, they were forced to slow down, regroup, and rethink their approach. Jack watched from the shadows as their confidence started to waver, their once arrogant stride now cautious and uncertain. But that was just the beginning. Jack had more in store for them. He began setting up EMP traps, using scavenged electronics and materials he had stashed away for emergencies. The first time the aliens triggered one, it was chaos. Their advanced weapons and communications went dark, leaving them vulnerable and isolated in the heart of the forest. They scrambled to fix their tech, but without it, they were just as lost and helpless as any human would be. That's when Jack struck. He moved like a ghost through the trees, picking off soldiers one by one. They never saw him coming. He didn't engage in long, drawn-out fights. That wasn't the way of the forest. He hit hard, fast, and disappeared before they even knew what had happened. Plasma rifles and force fields were useless when you couldn't even see your enemy. Each kill weighed on him, but he reminded himself why he was doing it. These aliens had come to his home to kill, to enslave. They saw humans as weak, insignificant. But Jack was going to make sure they left Earth with a different understanding. Humans were dangerous, especially when you pushed them into a corner. The aliens were breaking. Their once tight formations were falling apart, fear creeping into their every move. They had never faced an enemy like Jack, an enemy who used the terrain, who knew how to fight without relying on technology. Every time they thought they had found him, he was already gone, leaving only more destruction in his wake. But Jack wasn't just fighting blindly. He had a plan. He knew the soldiers weren't acting alone. There had to be a leader, someone pulling the strings, directing the invasion. Jack needed to find that leader, and he needed to take him down. It was the only way to end this. He started targeting key officers, watching how the remaining soldiers reacted. Each time he took down an officer, the others grew more disorganized, their responses slower, less coordinated. Jack was getting closer. The alien commander would have to show himself soon. He had no choice. Jack kept the pressure on, setting traps, picking off soldiers, forcing the aliens to retreat further into the forest. He was relentless, never giving them a moment to regroup. The forest, once an alien and hostile place to the invaders, had become Jack's greatest ally. Every tree, every rock, every patch of undergrowth was part of his arsenal. The aliens didn't stand a chance. And then, finally, he saw his opportunity. The alien commander had emerged from the safety of the main camp, clearly desperate to stop the bleeding. Jack watched him from a distance, studying his movements. This was the one who had ordered the attacks, who had brought this chaos to Earth. Jack wasn't going to let him leave these woods alive. The commander was heavily armed, but Jack knew that didn't matter. The fight wasn't going to be about who had the best weapon or the toughest armor. It was going to be about who knew the land better, who could outthink their opponent. And in that, Jack had no equal. He moved into position, silently circling around the commander's guards. He had to be careful. One mistake, and the aliens would overwhelm him. But Jack was patient. He waited for the perfect moment, the exact second when the commander's attention was focused elsewhere. And then he struck. In the blink of an eye, Jack was on them, his traps already set. The guards were disabled before they even knew what was happening, their weapons useless against the EMP pulses Jack had triggered. The commander, shocked by the suddenness of the attack, scrambled to bring his plasma rifle to bear, but it was too late. Jack had him pinned, his survival knife pressed against the alien's throat. For a moment, Jack considered finishing it right then and there. But that wasn't his style. He didn't kill out of anger or revenge. The commander needed to understand that this wasn't just about one man's fight. This was Earth sending a message: if you come here, you don't leave unscathed. Jack delivered that message clearly before vanishing into the forest once again, leaving the alien commander alive but humiliated. The hunt wasn't over yet. But Jack knew, as he melted back into the shadows, that the tide had turned. The invaders were running out of time. And soon they'd be running out of lives. The alien commander was furious. Every plan, every strategy had failed. His soldiers, once the pride of the Galactic Federation, were reduced to terrified survivors, barely able to hold their ground in this cursed forest. They had come here expecting a swift and easy conquest, but instead, they found themselves hunted like animals by a single human. This was not how things were supposed to go. He could feel the tension in the air as he prepared for what he knew had to be the final confrontation. The rest of his troops were scattered, either dead or missing, and those that remained were broken, unable to function as a unit. Their advanced weapons, once a source of confidence, now seemed almost useless in the face of an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. The humans didn't engage in direct combat. They attacked from the shadows, struck and disappeared before anyone could retaliate. But this human, the one they called Jack, was different. The commander had reviewed the reports, heard the stories from his surviving soldiers. Jack wasn't just using his environment to his advantage. He was toying with them, outsmarting them at every turn. The commander wasn't going to let this go on any longer. He was done playing games. It was time to end this. Jack's attacks had grown bolder. The commander could sense that the human was closing in, pushing him towards a final encounter. He was sure Jack wanted him to make a mistake, to get desperate, but the commander wasn't going to fall for it. He would take Jack out personally and prove once and for all that even the best of Earth's hunters couldn't stand against the Galactic Federation's might. But as he moved through the forest, his tactical helmet scanning the terrain for any sign of Jack, doubt began to creep in. Every step he took felt wrong. The forest seemed to close in around him, as if it were alive, watching his every move. His scanners were still useless, interference from the environment scrambling the signals, and his soldiers were nowhere to be found. It was just him now, alone in hostile territory. He hadn't realized how much he had come to rely on his tech until it started failing him. That's when he saw it, a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. He spun around, plasma rifle raised, but there was nothing there. Just the wind rustling the leaves. Or was it? He couldn't be sure anymore. His nerves were fraying. He was the hunter, but in this moment, he felt like the hunted. He pushed the thought out of his mind, trying to stay focused. Jack was nearby. He could feel it. The commander moved cautiously, his every sense heightened. The forest was quiet, too quiet. His instincts told him this was the calm before the storm. He needed to find Jack before Jack found him, but that was easier said than done. The human had been playing this game for days, and each time, he'd come out on top. Another sound, this time to his left. He turned again, firing a burst of plasma into the trees, but the energy bolts hit nothing but bark and leaves. Sweat dripped down his forehead. He couldn't shake the feeling that Jack was always one step ahead, watching him, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then it happened. Without warning, the ground beneath him gave way. He fell into a deep pit, his armor slamming into the earth with a heavy thud. The wind was knocked out of him, and for a moment, everything went dark. When he came to, he was trapped, his legs pinned by debris. His rifle lay just out of reach. He struggled to free himself, but his strength wasn't enough. That's when Jack appeared. Silent, methodical, and completely in control. The commander tried to move, but it was no use. Jack was already on him. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking down at the alien who had come to take his home. There was no anger in Jack's eyes, no rage, just cold, calculated intent. This was what he had been waiting for, what he had been preparing for all along. The commander reached for a hidden blade on his armor, but Jack was faster. He kicked the weapon away, making it clear there was no fight left to be had. The alien could only lie there, helpless, his once superior technology reduced to nothing more than scrap in the face of a man who had mastered his environment. Jack finally spoke, his voice low and calm. He didn't gloat, didn't taunt. He simply made it clear that Earth wasn't a place that could be conquered so easily. The Galactic Federation had underestimated humanity, and they had paid the price. Jack wasn't just defending his home, he was sending a message to anyone else who thought they could invade. Earth wasn't weak. Its people weren't pushovers. And if they came back, they would face the same fate. Without another word, Jack left the commander there, trapped and defeated. The alien's pride was shattered, but his life was spared, a mercy Jack didn't have to grant, but one that sent a stronger message than death ever could. The remaining soldiers, scattered and broken, wouldn't last long in the forest without their leader, without their tech. Jack knew they'd either retreat or meet the same fate as the rest of their squad. Either way, the invasion was over. As Jack disappeared into the trees, the commander could only stare after him, his mind racing. This mission had been a disaster, a complete failure. He had underestimated these humans, just as everyone in the Federation had. They had assumed that primitive technology meant primitive minds, that Earth was ripe for the taking. But Jack had proven them wrong. Humanity had survived far worse than this. They had fought their own wars, faced their own struggles, and come out stronger every time. Back at the Galactic Federation, the reports would tell a different story. The survivors, if there were any, would return with tales of horror, of a planet that wasn't as weak as it seemed. And perhaps next time, the Federation would think twice before underestimating Earth. For now, the forest was silent once more, but Jack knew better than to let his guard down. The fight wasn't over, not really. The Federation might be gone for now, but they'd be back. They always came back. And when they did, Jack would be ready. Earth would be ready. The hunters of Earth had made their stand, and the galaxy would never forget it.